We're live. I'm Jono Proudfoot, and my guest today is Hassina Kajee, who is the medical director of the Nutrition Network and also the medical director of EBSA, which is the Eat Better South Africa initiative. Now, a little anecdote about how we met. I remember it was, I think, 2015. And the Noakes Foundation had been looking for ways to really get stuck in, and they had split their resources between raising money for research and then raising money to actually make a difference in impoverished communities where people actually needed help the most. And they set up the very first pilot project called the EBSA initiative, or Eat Better South Africa, and they set it up in Ocean View, which is a community in Kommetjie. So one Saturday morning, I drove all the way out to Kommetjie to go and talk about the red, green, and orange list. And there was Hassina, who had a newborn baby on her hip, walking around, like checking all the test tubes and blood tests and basically facilitating all of the medical goings on while I think your baby must have been a week old. So I knew from day one that she was very hardcore, but also very passionate and very enthusiastic. And so as time has gone on, as I understand it, Hassina left practicing medicine with patients where she was a recruiter skier, and she's now joined the Nutrition Network, and she's in charge of running the curriculum, because Nutrition Network does training for professionals who want to further their knowledge in low carbohydrate in clinical practice. And so she joins us today. Thank you so much for joining me. We call it banting, others call it keto, some call it low carb, and you call it therapeutic carbohydrate restriction. What is the difference?
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much. So the thing is that there is no specific lifestyle or diet, or it's not one size fits all. We're all individuals. We all have our own kind of genetic risk that we come to the party with. We all have our own stressors in life and how we deal with things. So we need to be a lot more specific. So not every patient that comes to see me needs to eat under 25 grams of carbs. It really depends on what you're doing. And I don't just look at diet, it's holistic. But the diet part comes, the lifestyle, as you know, comes into the play because you're really looking at who's this person, how do they live, who's their support structure, how much time do they have for food prep, that kind of thing. And it's about matching that to the patient and then looking at the person's individual risk and what are you trying to do? Are you a totally uncontrolled brand new diabetic who's coming with sugars close to 30? Or are you coming to me because you want to prevent diabetes and you're at risk of insulin resistance, but you're fit and your sugar is still controlled? The amount of restriction, the amount you restrict that carbohydrate is going to differ individual to individual. So that's pretty much what it is. It's not a one size fits all. People hear, you eat keto, which means, oh my goodness, you can't eat any fruit. That's not true. It's intelligent practice. And really that's what it is.
Got it. So talk about, I think a lot of people watching this will be pretty clear that you can use low carb to reverse diabetes. I mean, by now, I pray that is kind of accepted knowledge. But you spoke about prevention, and as I understand it, that's a different game. What kind of things do you consider when looking at preventing?
So in terms of prevention, you have to have a very clear idea of where you're coming from. And that you can do the full Monty approach where you get all your DNA and you can map your genes. And you can see what you're susceptible to. You can check if you've got ligamental kind of fragility. And so this exercise, that type of exercise, you can do that. Or you can do it the very common sense way, which is what comes up in your family? Does cancer come up? Does diabetes come up? Does heart disease come up? What kind of ages are we talking about? And really, if you think about it, we, as a modern generation, I mean, my age group didn't really, I mean, I've had a pretty healthy childhood, but in general, we didn't really start eating out. That wasn't a thing until I was, in late teens. And then as in my 20s, it became something that was the ready meals and things like that were available. But our children are born into an environment where the pregnant mom has been eating that way for a while, eats that way throughout her pregnancy, and is breastfeeding the child while eating poorly. So, at the end of the day, you really have to look at who is this person. If you're looking at prevention and you're coming through, I've got patients who come in who have familial hypercholesterolemia, but they're very aware and they've read all the papers. They can quote all the papers that I have in my stash, on my folder on my computer. And they run and there's a little bit of tweaking there, because then you're looking at the various factors that contribute to disease. So the question is, what makes us sick? And what makes us sick, a big thing, of course, is food. And food in itself is really not just sugar. If we could just talk about sugar and everybody could understand that, look, we're eating too much sugar. If we could get that message out for 2020 and everyone understands that, yikes, we would have cured something big. But it's more than that in the nutrition itself. So nutrition is one thing. Then we've got sleep, which is a major thing. Everyone's skimping on sleep because we just have so much to do. So we're skimping on sleep and we're pushing the caffeine in order to get through the next day. And our kids, I did that to just took almost 4 of me having caffeine.
I never drink coffee. I never drink coffee after 1 o'clock. But I've had like 2 very early mornings with the sick child. So I thought, okay, just for this time. And then you busted me.
But, there are robust studies that show that poor quality sleep, it impairs everything. Insulin resistance. It impairs your immunity. It switches off the natural killer cells in our immune system, that is the primary cell that is in constant surveillance for tumor cells.
Is that caffeine or not sleeping?
Sleep, okay, not sleeping, okay. Not sleeping. And it's quality of sleep and quantity of sleep. So when you're skimping on that for even just a few hours for one night, your susceptibility to infection goes, so there's a whole lot of sleep studies so sleep is a huge thing for me. Then stress management. Very few people realize that they have poor stress, how we deal with a child spilling milk all over the floor, someone cutting in front of us, big things, small things, middle-sized things. That's a massive. And exercise. What kind of exercise are you doing? Are you building muscle? Do you have enough cardiorespiratory? Are you flexible? What are your relationships like? What are your with your partner, with your parents, with your community? Do you belong? Do you feel like you belong in your community? All of these things have implications on the epigenetic mechanisms, the mechanisms that switch on disease. So we've got our genes, and then we've got switches above the genes. And when there's certain things that have been proven to switch on certain driving genes, so again, it's what we know, it's lifestyle. So, it's really about the person who's coming in who wants to prevent that. Is your diet on form? It doesn't have to be 100%, but 70-30, 80-20, more or less. I'm a bit of an idealist, a purist, so I'm more like a 99%, 1%, which is a negative for me because it's a stress-inducing mechanism for people who can't do that in my family. So that's a learning curve for me. So it's that. Are you sleeping? All of these, and it's just about guiding and just like pruning, not really pruning, but guiding a little bit and just journeying and being open to the journey rather than being like, oh, I'm so lazy or I'm such a slob or, labeling, rather just accept this is where I am. And
I'm quite interested in your take on extreme fit or extreme health, because I know that people can take it too far. I can't remember the term, but there's, you get in, and that's obviously a cost on everything. And then you get the opposite, which is when you are so disciplined that you actually rob yourself of all the fun in its entirety. And you said that you're 99%. So I'm curious.
Yeah, that's my gene code, my gene. So can I just chat about that a little bit? Because,
please, yeah, go for it.
Because my own journey as a doctor, you have to realize that in school you're excelling. Like in terms of academics, you have to sit your bum in the chair, and you're grade driven. And then you get into university and you're now competing with all those people who are also grade driven. And then you become a doctor and you plopped into this real world where you're diagnosing real people, seeing real people grieve. So you haven't really had a chance to be a person unless you've had good role models. And it really is difficult, because you see, in med school, I had so many colleagues who were on the brink of suicide because they hadn't developed other avenues or other parts of themselves. So they were grading their grades. So if they got 98% and they were supposed to get 100%, that was like a disaster zone. So thankfully, I'm not there. But my own journey is that I know that I'm a perfectionist. And it came up when my daughter, before, when you met me, my son was just born and my daughter was 3 at the time. So we were a relatively healthy family. She did get the mom who baked her the fondant covered cakes. And I remember I never had training in that. So it was like a YouTube thing. And I had to get that edge of the fondant so sharp, and I couldn't get it. And I was like, there's a point to what I'm saying here. And I realized that there's this, where the heck is this perfectionism coming from? It's a 2-year-old's birthday party. The people from school are coming. That's it. And it was a journey that really that particular time highlighted that I thought I was a perfectionist and I wore it as a crown. Oh, I'm a perfectionist. But I realized how debilitating it was, because indeed it was robbing me. I had to have exactly clean and dust-free and all the things checked. And being a parent and living and just giving myself just easy on myself and being a spectator a little bit helped me to realize how unhealthy that was for me as a person. And that's why I say that it's really important to have that empathy for yourself and to start to live a little bit and realize that it's okay. Unless, if you're celiac, if you're a patient with celiac and you can't have gluten, well, you can't have gluten, that's it. But, in our home, for example, we eat food. So there's no, the kids, we're not deprived, because we're trying to get the best cuts of the best types of fish. So if my kids like, a trout or something like that, it's like I've given them a massive dessert. They would rather have grass-fed, because when exposed to food, they appreciate food. So for us, there's no stress around. When you're traveling, you can afford to be a little bit less stringent, simply because you may not have what you're used to. So you can have the, drovos with the preservatives, So for my side, my daughter has food sensitivities and had quite bad gut issues, even though it was such a clean diet. But so she can't eat too many nuts and like almonds and that off balance, like legumes and beans and things like that. So because we've been on that journey of gut, it's very important for me to just make sure that she understands what she can't eat. But my son is a little bit easier, so it's okay for him to have a little more dairy. So it's that individuality and teaching her to not feel deprived. It's not like 99% you can't have it, so no one's going to have it. So we were like that initially to make it easy for her.
Yeah. I'm in the difference between causing and preventing. And I had this argument when we wrote Raising Superheroes, where someone said to me, if you don't give a child gluten, they'll grow up being gluten intolerant. And so maybe this is connected to the epigenetics that you were mentioning earlier. What's your take on exposure to prevent or exposure to just express the genes? Is there science there?
So it has to do with gut health. So the way I think about it, and there's a book that I'm going to try and pull up on Kindle. It's by Dr. Gundry, who's a cardiologist, who I'll get the title just now. But essentially, he did gut as a dam wall. So if you consider the dam wall, you consider that it's really damaged. So you had it to, PUFAs and lectins and, preservatives and all of these things. And you've got, you're susceptible. Some people are a little bit more resilient, but you're more susceptible genetically, and you live with it, or you have asthma and you live with it, and you take the pumps and you take the medication, or some form of autoimmune disease or whatever it is, and you just live with it. If you look at that gut, you're missing lots of bricks. So if you pull out a few more bricks, you're going to feel it, because you're going to have a lot of the integrity wall is damaged. So, but if you have the opposite of that, which is a gut wall that is healed with very few leaks in it, and you pull out a little bit here and there, then you're not going to have as much of a reaction. So, for example, when my daughter she had moderate to severe eczema that popped out of nowhere, that was fueled by a combination of some stressful school situation that she was going through. The fact that she was eating, I was doing the keto mum thing and baking lots of almond flour muffins, and the fridge was stocked with that. And we were all fine, but I just noticed that she's a tall kind of ballerina body girl, but when she ate carrots, she would get this big thing with belly, which we call baking bread. It's just basically that the gut bugs, they're producing too much gas. And the thing about the gut microbiome, the bugs that live in the gut, is that you don't want one colony to be king. You want a nice, diverse community of bugs in the gut. And when she had the eczema, was very little. A lot of people are going through syndrome. So it's like an inflammatory disorder that they can't eat this and they can't eat. It's a very restricted, and she was very much anything that releases histamine in your body, you normally get with eating foods. She couldn't tolerate the slightest amount, even bone broth. So any food that's cooked for too long, fermented, sauerkraut, she couldn't eat, biltong, she couldn't eat. Because the minute she was exposed to that, she would pop up her eczema with flare. So it was a long journey of removing everything for a period of time, doing a gut healing protocol with little quality and very little else, little bits of bone, and allowing the integrity of the gut to heal, and then slowly reintroducing foods to the point that she's now unrestricted. She can eat pretty much whatever she wants. It takes, so it really is up to the person's susceptibility. And if you're fine eating that way, I wouldn't eat gluten because of the effect that I know that it has on the gut. So I would rather give my kids white, or rice or bananas or whatever it is, than to give them. And if I do expose them to wheat, then I'm going to and have found a wheat, and make sure that it's an artisanal sourdough that's been long fermented. And then they have, it's a treat. It's like something once or twice a year, but it's not. So, so it's that type of balance. But it really depends on, I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't know if you know this, but I used to take a Texer every single day. And when Real Meal first came out, I was the guy who was like, I was 6 out of 7. So I'd bant like a machine, and then I'd have like have like my cheat day, and I kept taking this. And my thing was that like I used to just get crazy itchy skin, so I never got a rash. I used to get really itchy, and I thought, oh, it must be the sugar or something in my diet. And anyway, so I quit drinking alcohol, and then for the following year, I had non-beer quite often, and I noticed that I was still getting hangovers even though I wasn't drinking alcohol. And I was still getting super itchy, and because I wasn't drinking, I was actually eating, like. And then the next year, I said, okay, I'm going to quit gluten, and I quit gluten, and 3 months later, I took my last Texa, just like that. And so I started only taking it when I needed it, and then so for originally, okay, now I've put gluten as a religion because I said I quit, and then I realized like actually the reason I wanted to quit was because I didn't want to medicate for something that I didn't need medication for. And so then and so now actually, so then I gave it like a whole year with no gluten. I had a Christmas binge, and then I had a whole nother year. And last year I said, okay, cool, well, the rule's going to change now. The rule now is that I will never take Texa again.
Yeah.
And so now I eat gluten, and then I wait a week. And a week later, if I'm itchy, then I'm like, no, that's it. You've like crossed the threshold. But I'm managing it like that. So it's shifted it from being this religious, like, I'm the real meal guy, and therefore I will not eat, to like, actually, you're just preventing pain. It took like 2 years to get to that point of like healing the gut. So I'm curious how long it took your daughter to heal her gut, and any other stories there.
It took about 18 months of being strict with, you can't touch the bean salad from Cafe Rue from the, you can't, that kind of thing, like that strict. She could have salami and that kind of thing again, and the bone broth and all of that. But it was it had a patient, chronic fatigue syndrome, who literally would get the energy. She had to get the energy up to come to see me the first time, because I physically had to examine her. She literally could just get up and say goodbye to her kids in the morning, and then she would lie down. She had to do very minimal activity, and she started the protocol and mailed me a couple of months later to say her life has changed. And it literally is remove that can come from just removing what's not good for you. It's not about what I should eat even. It's about what's not good for you. The thing that we don't talk about often enough is the PUFAs, and the linoleic acid and the bad fats, because they're extremely inflammatory. I mean, I've had my fair share of, and then you order whatever it is, the ribs or the chicken or whatever, and it's been cooked in whatever, sunflower oil. It's going to be done in lard or tallow. And you go, it's one day. But the more I read and the more I know and the more I've experienced, the more, it's few and far. So I choose the places that we'll go to. I'm not going to go out and have like deep fried fish or grilled fish. That's my choice. But at the time, you have to do, for me to be who I am, I don't want to eat the food. If I eat that's not okay for me, I feel horrible while I'm eating it. That means for me. But if you feel that in order to be healthy, I need to have that piece of bread or whatever with my family, it's a happy medium. You have to find that balance, because the state of deprivation, the feeling of, I've had patients who just felt so deprived, who desperately needed to eat better, and literally just gave up because their community didn't change. The thing about our brain is that we are hardwired for community. We have mirror neurons that want to mirror what we're seeing. And if our community eats whatever they eat and we feel excluded. You find yourself a community where they're mirroring what you do, how you live your life, the way you want to exercise, the type of you want to have, the food you eat, more or less. It's much easier to stay on track because that's my tribe, and that's what we do. We don't do that. We don't eat that way. And it's more of a behavior. And like you said, your thought pattern shifted. And so that's more powerful.
Totally. Now, for a grown-up, these things are quite, I say easy to process. I mean, they're not easy to process. To like reframe the way you do things, it takes a lot of work. So I'm curious about how you do this with children. You're saying that we should be caring for kids. And in fact, I want to just shift the conversation to what your talk at the World Nutrition Summit is going to be about, because you're talking about disease-proofing the future, which comes down to having healthy children. And a child who goes to school like mine, and in fact, like yours as well, sees all the other parents put absolute trash in the lunchbox. They go to kids' parties. They just everywhere they go. I mean, let's be honest, the sugar industry's got a target on every child's back. So how do we get them healthy without giving them the mental health trauma of deprivation?
Yeah, and that's very very pertinent, and it is something for me. It's just been second nature. So for my children, I teach them why. So that a banana has 8 to 10 teaspoons of sugar. They go, "Oh, Mom, I can't have the other half apple because that's already 2.5 teaspoons of sugar." That it doesn't have to be that bad to know, but it's education. So I'll tell you, what you said was the icing on the cake, so to speak, when you said that you would have your binge day and then you would suffer, and then you would have your binge day and then you would thrive. The only way for people to learn is to experience it. So firstly, if your children don't eat a lot of sugar or don't eat a lot of junk food at home, their taste buds change. So their ability to tolerate sugar change, firstly. So their whole physiology changes. So they may want to take that big blue or whatever Cookie Monster cupcake thing with all the icing, but they're not going to be able to finish it. They're going to have half and then they're going to feel terrible. They're going to maybe have it and they're going to come home and they're going to have a sore tummy or a runny tummy. Or like my children. So what I did was, I said straight up, first day, when you fill in that form for the teacher, she doesn't eat this, this, and this, and this. Please let me know if there's going to be stuff and things, and I will provide certain things. And then I looked at my child looking at these big blue cupcakes, and you can have a cupcake on the birthday day. There are 20 odd children in the class. That means she's getting that, plus every Friday was Baker Man. Okay? So that means every Friday was a cupcake that she was eating. And what happened is that every single time she went to a party, 36 hours later, she was sick. Without fail, 36 hours later, she would have a fever, she would have a runny nose, something, every bug that went around, she got it, even though she was totally healthy at home. So I got to a point where I was very lucky because I had Catherine Barnhorn, the owner of Mila's Meal. I mean, the author of Mila's Meals. It was in our class, and she's very bombastic about my child doesn't eat this, and it was very nice. We had a couple people in the class with sugar. It really is about standing up for yourself. So I would have to talk to the drama teacher to say, please don't reward my child with a sweet after. Here is a package. It's about educating. I would buy a bag of things. I would make up a little package of things that don't go bad, like, not low carb stuff, date bars or date balls or, whatever it is, of things, dark chocolate. And I would give it to the teacher and say, when there's Baker Man, could you please give her the equivalent of whatever others? If they're getting this big thing, give her 2 of these, a bag of nuts. And I would just do that. But the main thing is that she was on board. And the only way she would be on board is if she went through what she went through. She realized that she got sick. She made a decision that she doesn't get sick anymore. And she could choose what she wanted. So I made sure she was part of making up the bag. And the thing is, Jono, that her lunchbox was beautiful.
Yeah.
Always. She had colors in it. She had reds and greens and cheeses and of meat, so much so that the mums would come to me and say, my son wants me to send seaweed to school because he's seeing seaweed. And my daughter says she wants me to please. So you can be the change. You just do not feel like the odd one out. And you have to empower the children to know that this is a good source of protein and this is a good source of whatever it is, for eye health or brain health or omega-3s. And yeah, maybe they'll be like a bit nerdy, but who cares? They know what's going into their. That's kind of it. So it was a journey, and it was really about embracing it and never having a deprivation. So there's kombucha in our house, and I even went through a period of making my own. I couldn't make it not as sweet or
Power
whatever.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're part of it. They cook in the and you like, for example, my son loves bananas, but I don't want them to have too much sugar because we have a strong genetic predisposition to cardiac disease in our family. So for me, it's real. It's real, a young disease. So they know that it would be limited. And just before I came in, my 9-year-old was making him a banana boat that she came up with, which is splitting the banana in half and putting macadamia nut butter in and some pecan and some dark chocolate. And he was like, oh, this is the best day of my life. I love banana boats. The last time he's had bananas is a few months ago. Wow. So it's really about, it's about balance, understanding, and buy-in. They're individuals. You cannot dictate.
Yeah, I think what you said there is really important with buy-in, and if I could go back in time and rewrite sections of Raising Superheroes, I would put in what I want to talk about, which is the mental health element, but specifically around choice. So at Real Meal, we get many different types of get the people who want to lose a kilo or two, people who want to lose like 50 or 60. But the ones who struggle the most are the ones who aren't just there to deal with their biology. They're because they have this fundamental belief that something's wrong with them and they're battling with low self. And it's a crippling place to be because you suspect you're going to fail before you even. That comes from being 8 years old or 9 years old and being told that you have to eat a certain way. And so these clients of ours rock up and they say, well, and they always start when we hear the story, they say, well, my mother put me on a diet when I was 9 years old, took me off to weigh less. And for a 9-year-old, even if if you think they're smiling all their way, what they basically interpret that is like, well, there's something wrong with me and I need to go to this place. And I will only be worthy of stuff that's awesome when I'm thin, like my mom says I must be. And so just a little bit of a share from my side. So I think like if I could I could just add one piece to this conversation. The buy-in part of it is so critical. And Kate and I have this thing at home because our daughter is so obviously gluten intolerant. So she's like pretty like yours as well. And you can see when she eats a roll, she sits there and her tummy's so sore and she's like, oh, it's so sore. And we're like, it's probably the gluten, my girl. It's probably the gluten. She's like, ah. And then she quit gluten for Lent. This year was the first time. She said, no, I'm going to go gluten-free. And she's battling. She's like, I have that. I really want like the sandwich or whatever. And so it's so interesting watching a little mind, but she's decided and she's determined, which is so different to us, like, banning her. Because you know what it's like having it. If you say you can't have it,
some point. But there's this thing, what you said made me think about, there's this mentality that I fell into pretty early in my keto journey, which is you can't have, so I'll make keto muffins, and you can't have bread. So let's have the recipe to get the best bread. And it really isn't, it's about ditching everything that you used to do, food. Eating eggs, good quality eggs, eating good quality meat, chicken, fish, vegetables, and starting to get the natural flavor with very little interference. Figuring out can be flavored with this and this and that. And oh my goodness, that was just. So it's also that that, that, because I was about to say that there are quite a few options. I mean, in this day and age, there are lots of gluten-free options, and there are lots of keto options. You can go to the shop, but I wouldn't suggest that. For people, the adults watching this, I wouldn't you go replace this with that. I would suggest that you figure yourself out. Figure out what you need, what you like, what you enjoy, and then go, oh, I can try that, and I can have that as a substitute once a week instead of falling off and have stuff that's harmful for me. But the thing is that it's not just food related in terms of childhood. And this is where the relationship part of longevity and health in. It is about connection. It is about that child having a voice from the moment they're born, that that type of parenting, that we see them as individuals, that we give them, you're still the parent. It's up to you to decide. I'm not saying the child has the choice for everything, but it's about respecting that it's a dance, that sometimes I'm going to lead, sometimes you're going to lead, and you're going to, when is the point for the child's going to say, I've had some horrible situations with my children. Like my son had this issue where he couldn't swallow granular textures. And there was an egg on his plate and he wouldn't eat the yellow. And you're going to eat that. And he said, I was not as mature. I'm a work in progress. But I said, you're going to eat that. And we were rushing, and you're that, because I thought he was being difficult because he's a strong personality. He said, Mom, I feel like I'm going to vomit if I eat that. I said, you're going to eat it. And he swallowed it and he vomited. And he didn't make it happen. And to this day, about 4 years later, he reminds me, do you remember that time you made me eat that thing? And I told you that my body was telling me no. So now, you learn as a parent, and you have to learn that, you know that person who's in that body knows their body better. And so, you have to figure out tricks. For example, if my son fish and I pull out a packet of seaweed and I say, ooh, do you want to, and you dip it in some like tamari or something. Well, do you want to try make your own sushi? And he's like, ooh, suddenly the fish is the whole plate's gone. And
I want to talk about some statistics, if you know them offhand. And you spoke about, because we were talking about the problem with kids, and perhaps you can give it some context. Is that I think when I was in my teens, in the mid 90s, late 90s, I was a teenager, and early 2000s, type 2 diabetes was called adult onset diabetes, and now it's more commonly referred to as type 2 diabetes, and actually you were getting a lot of teenagers and some children with type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so the context of this chat's really to address the elephant in the room, which is that kids are getting like what were previously known as like old people conditions, really, really young. What kind of stats can you tell us, and how will you be addressing this in your talk?
Yeah, I mean, look, as you said, the numbers of children that pediatricians are seeing with these adult onset diseases, they're astronomical. If you read any of Dr. Robert Lustig's books, he practices as an endocrinologist and a pediatrician. He's not in practice anymore. He's retired. But the numbers are astronomical. And I, for example, if I just go through my own history, studying as a medical student and then going through my specialization training and then practicing, went from never seeing a person with a heart attack. You see overweight people, to suddenly in my specialization seeing quite a few people coming in, under 10 in my entire that specialization part, internship, all of that. The age of coming in with an MI, to running a high care unit where 10 of the beds at one point, all 100% of the beds were full of cardiac disease, and about half of those people were under 35, under 40. And what was worse for me was having a man in the bed at the age of like 28 with his wife coming to visit him. So he's had a MI. And when I talk massive MI, I mean that his cardiac function is now has gone from 75%, which is like sort of normal, to 25%.
So MI being myocardial infarction. Yeah.
And so now you have a man who should be in his prime with a pregnant wife coming to visit him and in tow, both carrying a packet of flings and a whatever Oros, not just normal looking children, but children that were overweight. So you can see it in the genes. So, like, especially now, we have to be even more careful because the state of being overweight is literally, it's not about what you look like. It's a state of your visceral adipose tissue, your dangerous white expanding. The thing with is they have the ability for their adipose tissue to what we call hyperplasia, more cells, so they can make more cells. But once you are beyond adolescence, you can't make cells. What you have is what you have. So if you're going to gain weight, you're going to expand cells. And that of those existing cells is the problem because you outgrow your blood flow. And that puts a stress in the system, which feeds to parts of the body, the liver, the brain, and all the hormones that are involved. And that is basically the fire of inflammation that starts everything rolling towards developing all kinds of diseases, cancer, diabetes, hypertension, all of these things.
You're saying that, just let me make sure I know what you're saying. You're saying that like an adolescent, you can still multiply your fat cells. But then for instance, if you're an adult, you can't multiply them, but they just swell. So when you're a child, you can multiply them and they swell.
You can so you're eating excess excess. You have to stockpile them somewhere. You can sell to stockpile them. The problem is that the statistics show that childhood obesity is associated with a very high risk of adult obesity. So you may be an overweight child, you still have, once you're reaching adolescence and after the point of adolescence, what the number of cells that you have is fixed, more or less. There is this tiny group of people who can be overweight and metabolically healthy, which I'm not saying I'm 100% on board with, but it's not I just want people to know that it's not about, the child has a little bit of fat to lose. There's inflammation underlying. The underlying aspect is inflammation, because it's that inflammation that is the driver of chronic disease, of that obesity. We need to think of obesity as an external look, and we need to start thinking of obesity as inflammation. And that's where it's tying into what is driving that inflammation. Poor sleep, poor mental health drives inflammation, the cortisol spikes and all of that, poor inflammation. So low exercise, high exercise, improve your exercise, then you switch on mitochondrial mechanisms to limit that, that oxidation so all of that helps. Yeah. So, I just want to end by saying that I don't want people to leave this going, oh my goodness, my child is in a state of inflammation.
Don't take to wellness,
Yeah. Just become aware and explain it in a way that is not labeling. The older the child, the easier it is. And just remember that the way we speak to children, it's that they're the ones, like we were saying, that you kind of put it out there and you stockpile the fridge with the healthy food that they like, that's okay for them. And then you let them make the decision for themselves. Like for a week of eating well, like, wow, how are you feeling? I noticed you're so much more energetic. I noticed, you're sleeping better, that kind of thing. There are ways to go about it. So please don't take the takeaway from this mustn't be the goodness my child's going to get all of these things. The body is adaptable. Our bodies are doing they're in the very best to keep functioning really well. It's just to become aware that there's all of these things that we think we're doing. Buying the packs of juices for school because it makes it easy to pack a lunch. Is not really doing the best. We spend so much time figuring out, and while we're pregnant, we apply so that we can get into that school of our choice, and we give them the best, whatever, clothes and exercise and all of the extramurals and all of these things. But we're also taking them to wherever after school and letting them have that slice of pizza and whatever they're eating as a snack, when we could be just doing it a little bit differently if we just pivot and think, what is this doing in terms of in the body?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I heard come up was around, there was, I said, don't reward my child with food. He's not a dog. And so I think if we shift our mindset there, we can have some powerful results, finding ways, like you said, a little sticker book or something to reward the kids, and start to because sometimes food is a reward. We celebrate, we have a big meal. But if there are other things there that we also reward ourselves with, then we have a more balanced and sort of level-headed approach, rather than every time we do anything good, we've got to take the sweet. Well, Hassina, it's always a pleasure to chat. And I won't let any of the viewers leave without giving them the hearts of the World Nutrition Summit 2022, which is in the link in this post, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or in the group or on our page. And there are going to be 40, just like Hassina, not all as awesome as Hassina. And they will be talking about matters related to nutrition, mental health, taking a holistic view on nutrition. It's not just like a religious gathering for low carb pundits. We're talking about plant-based, we're talking about mental health, food addiction, sugar addiction. Myself and our psychologist Victoria are doing a talk on the binge cycle, which is fascinating. And Hassina will be talking about disease-proofing the future, talking about healthy children and having healthy adults. So thank you so much for coming to chat to me. It's always a pleasure. And I hope, wonderful. And everyone who's watching this will now click on the link. It clicks on the link and it goes to the website and it checks out, because this summit is going to be awesome. It's from the 24th to the 27th of April 2022.
Well, at the end of the day, sorry to cut in.
No, I wanted to say, the last thing, you can speak and we can carry on in a second, but the last thing I wanted to say was that even if you are watching this after the 24th of April 2022, you can still buy the summit, because there will be an online version of it that you can buy if you watch it live. Okay, I'm finished now.
So the thing about the summit is that it was a total success. We had the first one last year and it was just overwhelmingly successful. The reason it was Prof. Noakes and everybody suddenly, these banters and these low carb people. And, the takeaway from that is that we need to be able to challenge all of these ideas that come up. As scientists, we need to be able to have these conversations. The last thing we wanted was to have a platform where somebody comes and says, listen, I'm vegan. And we go, oh, don't talk to me about veganism, because everybody approaches health from a different standpoint. So we wanted to create a platform where people are free to discuss. And, it's lovely to have this community of low carb enthusiasts who meet and chat, and we've grown so much in that world. But we live in the real world and we need to address the challenges specific to certain areas. For example, Africa has a whole lot of different who aren't able to afford low carb, they have to eat maize. Funny enough, a quick story from one of our nutrition network doctors in Africa. He created a clinic in a rural village where the people literally went from eating more of an industrial kind of diet, and they started to eat what they normally eat in the rural area, which is still tapioca, which is still legumes and beans. And he's had patients whose HbA1cs have gone from 16 to 4.3 while eating legumes, sweet potato, tapioca. And so it's important to have these conversations. We can't go, oh, but that's not low carb. But hang on, for them, carb. So it's really important that we create this safe space where we have invited so many people with different views to come and just talk about their view on health. Talking about the binge eating cycle, it's something that anyone can follow a meal plan, but we need to be talking about what it is about. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to follow that meal plan and you don't understand why. So that's why we have the Nutrition Network as well for people. It's not just for medical practitioners. It's also for lay people who want to train as advisors and coaches, because that was a huge need that people sent us so many messages saying, please, can you create this? And the World Nutrition Summit came from that diverse group of people and that need. So please click on the link and, we'd love to have you join us and hear your view. It is about beliefs and having those conversations.
Awesome. Hassina Kajee, Dr. Extraordinaire, Medical Director of Nutrition Network. Thank you once again. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time at the convention. Can't wait.
Awesome. Thanks so much.